All right, if you're an educator, you already know that teaching someone to read is one of the most important and honestly, one of the most complex things we do. So, in this explainer, we're going to tear it all down. We're going to move from the big ideas, the theories, all the way to practical stuff you can start using in your classroom tomorrow.
So what's the game plan? First, we'll nail down what reading really is. Then, we'll explore the big theories behind it, the why. After that, we'll get into some essential principles for every single reading teacher. Then, I'll introduce you to a really powerful framework to structure your lessons, and we'll wrap up by talking about the most important person in the room, you.
Okay, let's jump right in at square one. Before we can even talk about how to teach reading, we have to agree on what it actually is. Is it just about being able to say the words on the page correctly?
We tend to think of it that way, right? As just decoding, translating these little symbols on a page into sounds. But is that really the whole picture? Think about it. If a student can pronounce every single word perfectly, but has no clue what the paragraph means, have they actually read it?
Not a chance. And this image shows us exactly why. See, real reading isn't just one thing. It's this dynamic process. It happens right in that sweet spot where four things come together: the text itself, the reader's own background and experiences, their fluency, and the strategies they're using. Comprehension, real understanding, is born right there in the middle.
And that's the bottom line. The whole point, the goal of reading, is always comprehension. The meaning isn't just sitting there in the words, waiting to be picked up. And it's not totally in the reader's head either. It gets created in that little spark of a moment when what the reader already knows connects with the text on the page.
Okay, so that leads us perfectly into the big theories. And understanding these is so important because they're really the why behind all the different teaching methods you've probably seen or used in the classroom. For the longest time, there were basically two warring camps. On one side, you had the bottom-up model. This view says reading is all about decoding. You start with the smallest pieces, letters and sounds, and you build your way up to words, then sentences, and finally you get to the meaning. On the other side, you had the top-down model, which says, nope, reading starts in your brain. You use what you already know to predict and make sense of the text as a whole.
And this is absolutely vital. Whether you're a fan of phonics, which is bottom-up, or whole language, which is more top-down, you have to remember, these are just tools. They are the methods we use, but they are never the goal itself. The goal is always, always comprehension.
So where did this big debate finally land? Well, it led us to a much more complete and, frankly, a much more useful picture: the interactive model. Instead of forcing us to pick a side, it brings them both together, recognizing that skilled readers are actually doing both of these things at the same time. And what's so great about this model is that it just feels right, doesn't it? It reflects what actually happens. Good readers are constantly shifting. They use those bottom-up skills to sound out a tricky new word, but they're also using their top-down knowledge to predict what's coming next and make sense of it all. They're flowing back and forth between the text and their brain, and that's why a balance is so critical in our teaching.
Okay, so that's the theory, but let's get practical. What does this actually look like when you're standing in front of your students? Let's boil all this down into a few core principles that should guide every single reading lesson you teach.
Here are the 5 big ones. First, you've got to tap into what your students already know. Connect the new stuff to the old stuff. Second, build that vocabulary. You have to be relentless. Words are the building blocks. Third, our job is to teach comprehension, not just give a quiz on it later. We have to show them how. Fourth, build true fluency. And that's not just about reading fast, it's about reading with expression and understanding. And finally, you have to explicitly teach reading strategies. You have to pull back the curtain and show them the mental moves that good readers make.
And here's a really important distinction to make. When you first teach a student a new trick, like using context clues, that's a strategy. They're thinking about it, they're doing it on purpose. But our goal is for them to practice it so much that it becomes automatic, unconscious, it becomes a skill. We're trying to turn those deliberate actions into effortless habits.
So I know what you're thinking. That's a lot to keep in your head while you're also managing a classroom. So is there a way we can organize all these principles into a simple system we can use over and over again? You bet there is.
It's called the ACTIVE Framework. This is a 6-step system that is just brilliant for structuring your lessons and making sure you hit all those key principles we just talked about. ACTIVE.
So first step, A, is for activate. Before they even see the text, you get them thinking. Use something like an anticipation guide, a list of true-false statements about the topic. It gets their brains warmed up and ready to connect what they already think with what they're about to read.
Next, C is for cultivate. We have to build their vocabulary. A student can't understand a text if they don't know the words. An activity like a word web is perfect for this. You put a key concept in the middle and have the students brainstorm all the related words they can think of. It builds a map of the language they'll need.
Then we get to T for teach. And listen, this one is huge. Instead of waiting to the end to see if they got it, you actively show them how to make sense of the text while they're reading. Try a technique like questioning the author. You stop partway through and ask, okay, what is the author really trying to tell us here? You're basically modeling the inner monologue of a skilled reader. It's a game changer.
In the last three letters, IVE, they close the loop. I is for increased reading rate, using things like repeated readings to build that smooth fluency. V is for verify strategies. Get students to explain their thinking out loud with think-alouds. And finally, E is for evaluate progress. Empower students to track their own growth with things like reading journals.
All right, we've talked theory, we've talked about a practical framework, but now we need to talk about the most important part of this entire equation, and that's you.
Just let this phrase sink in for a second. The journey from being a good reader yourself to being a good teacher of reading, that is a massive conscious leap. Just because you can do it automatically doesn't mean you know how to break it down and teach it to somebody else. It is a completely different skill set.
And please never, ever underestimate your own impact. Study after study, all the research, it points to the same thing. The single biggest factor in whether a student succeeds is the quality of their teacher. Your passion, your knowledge, you make all the difference.
So you have to commit to your own growth. But don't try to change everything all at once. Just set 2 or 3 specific concrete goals for yourself. Maybe it's trying that questioning the author technique, or maybe it's starting reading journals. Share those goals with a colleague you trust. It'll keep you accountable. And of course, just never stop being a learner yourself.
So, I'll leave you with this to think about. After everything we've talked about today, what is one specific, actionable goal you can set for yourself to make your reading instruction even better? Give that some thought. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.